Karl-Anthony Towns tweeted today, yesterday was 2 years to the date that my parents walked into the ER at JFK Medical Center in Edison, New Jersey, and were admitted with COVID-19. The same hospital that my mother gave me life, and tragically the same hospital where I saw her life begin to slip away. 2 years later, I walked into AT&T Center with the greatest guardian angel that I could ever ask for and dropped 60 against the winningest coach of all time in Greg Popovich. I say this to say, no matter what life throws at you, you can come out of it stronger. Tough times don't last, tough people do. Miss you, mama. This game, my life, is for you. He gave the Spurs 60 points on 19 of 31 shooting with 17 rebounds last night. That's an NBA season, cat career, and Minnesota Timberwolves franchise high. All right, here to get buckets with us is John Schuhmann from NBA.com. So, John, lots to cover from last night. I mean, there was two stories that just really tugged at your heartstrings. We'll get to those as well as the games. Let's start with the Timberwolves. We just heard from Karl-Anthony Towns. I think they were 16-20. Now, and since then they've been 24-10, so up to 40-30, creeping up in the sixth spot, so almost playing their way out of the play-in, having won 8 out of 9 games. They're a game and a half out of the 6th seed in the Western Conference. They got this dynamic young core led by Karl-Anthony Towns. Top 10 offense, top 10-ish defense in terms of efficiency. How much of a problem can the Timberwolves be in these playoffs?
I think they can be pretty tough, just depending on the matchup. You know, I think if they're 7 or 6, you know, they're looking at Golden State or Memphis probably, and I think Golden State would be tough, but I think a Minnesota-Memphis series would be a ton of fun and would be a long series too, I think, just because of those two teams. I mean, Towns is great. I think the big thing for him is just the one thing I see is just his aggressiveness. Like, you know, he's attacking. I didn't watch all that game last night, but I watched them, say, a couple weeks ago. They're playing Golden State, and he was just doing this thing where he trails and attacks, right? He trails the break, catches at the top of the key, and then just goes at the guy in front of him, no matter who it is. And when he's doing that, 1, he's a good finisher. 2, he's going to get to the line, and then 3, that's going to open up other things. And so his ability to shoot is obvious. And so when he's attacking and can mix it up, and then the jumper, becomes more open, and he becomes dangerous to the point where he can score 60 points in a game, obviously.
So, and then going back to the other game and the other story we talked about, we just highlighted the incredible story about Bones Highland and him surviving the fire back in 2018, and then he goes out and performs in front of more or less his home crowd in Philadelphia last night. But going to the marquee matchup coming into that game, any takeaways as it relates to the MVP race as it comes down to the wire? Not that you would decide on one game or one victory, but just wondering if you got anything out of that game and just where you might be leaning when it comes to the issue of Embiid versus Jokic.
Yeah, I think I've been leaning Jokic. I think it's a 3-pronged thing. One is just sort of the box score stats. For one, he's the only guy averaging 20, 10, and 7, and he's averaging 26, 14, and 8, right? Like, 2, it's efficiency. If you look at the highest usage players in the league, he's the most efficient scorer of all of them, say like the top 50, 60 highest guys in regard to usage rate. He's number 1 in true shooting percentage, which measures scoring efficiency. And then 3, it's the on-off numbers, right? Like, his value to his team is so obvious. His team is generally much worse when he's off the floor. And that's where it comes to the game last night, which was, it sort of went against that last narrative. And the key minutes were early in the fourth quarter when Highland was hitting those threes. DeMarcus Cousins hit a couple threes, and the Nuggets really won that game with Jokic on the bench, which is, the total opposite of the script with that team. It's always, they lose a lead late third, early fourth, and he comes and rescues them in the last 7 or 8 minutes. And so that was my one takeaway. It's like, oh, maybe their bench is coming along here. I think there's been another game or two in the last couple weeks where their bench has looked a little bit improved. And if that's the case, well, then one, they're a much better team than they have been earlier in the season. And two, I guess it takes a little bit away from his MVP candidacy, but it's I guess a catch-22, or it's a give and take where it's like, oh, his on-off numbers aren't so drastic, so he doesn't look quite as valuable. If you take the literal case, the literal meaning of the word, but then two, maybe they get a couple more wins in the standings, and that helps his MVP case because they move up to fourth or fifth instead of sitting in sixth.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I love this time of year, John. 13 to 15 games left for most teams, and you start to see some teams really, for urgency reasons, they need to close strong to either make the playoffs or to solidify a top 2 or top 3 seed. And you look at both of these teams, Denver and Philadelphia, similar records. Do you see a championship roster right now with either of those teams? And if so, which team? And I guess I'll get a 2 for 1. Which team, if they have a championship roster, which team do you think could go further in the postseason?
Wow. Well, obviously Philadelphia, as they stand, has, I think, a higher ceiling just because they have Embiid and James Harden. But, they're in a tougher, with most of these East teams, you can see them losing in the first round. You can see them coming in the East. They all have that sort of floor and ceiling where, because the East is so good from 1 to 8, basically, anybody can lose in the first round, and one of them's eventually going to get to the finals, and I have no idea who that's going to be. I think the West is just I think it's Phoenix and Golden State, and maybe Utah. I think is still a little bit interesting, but the West, I think it's those two teams, and it's hard to make an argument for anybody against either of those two teams, especially if they're fully healthy. If Chris Paul comes back healthy, if Draymond Green obviously stays healthy, and Steph Curry stays healthy. If those two teams are at full strength, I don't see any team beating them in the playoffs.
One team you didn't mention there was Memphis. Is it just Ja Morant, but not enough elsewhere? Why not Memphis over Utah?
Well, I think if you look at point differential, and I think Utah is just a little bit stronger team. If you look at, they have the fewest losses in games that weren't within 5 in the last 5. So they've had some clutch issues, and they had some last night against Milwaukee. But they're really strong when they're full strength. They obviously had Mitchell out for a while, Gobert out for a while. When they've had those guys, they've been really strong and have barely lost any games that weren't close. Memphis, I think it's just an experience thing. I'll believe them in the playoffs when I see it, type of thing. I think that's just the case, but they're really good. And I love watching them play. And if they were in the conference finals, it wouldn't shock me to a huge extent. I just think Phoenix and Golden State are sort of head and shoulders above everybody else.
Hey, Mike, do me a favor. Cover your ears here. Earmuffs. John, I want you to listen to James Harden. I say earmuffs, man. I want you to listen to James Harden from last night.
I got to hear this.
And then I'm going to quote your own work to you to ask you about the Sixers. But first, here's James Harden talking about what went wrong against Denver last night.
You talked a lot about defense since you got here. Doc was talking before about the transition defense. It's been an issue the last few games. What do you guys have to do to improve?
We got to get our ass back on defense, man. The shot go up, whereas dribble penetration or whatever the case may be. I think 2 or 3 guys, whoever's not offensive rebounding, got to get back. And it's really hurt us. Last night, it almost hurt us, and tonight it hurt us. So that's a point of emphasis, and we got to just continue to build on that.
Yeah, they got crushed in transition. Denver had 29 fast break points. Nuggets had a 139 offensive rating in transition for the night. Now, that's defense, which we knew was a question coming in. I told you I'm not talking to you right now, Michael. This is between me
I'm
and
just
John.
listening. I'm enjoying it. I'm
But
enjoying
John,
this. This
I'm
is
reading your
beautiful.
power rankings. I don't know why you even bothered. I'm reading your power rankings column, which is always informative. And I didn't realize that among 140 players with at least 500 field goal attempts this season, James Harden ranks 43rd in true shooting percentage, and 113th in effective field goal percentage. Both marks his lowest since his rookie season. Second biggest drop in field goal percentage in the paint among 116 players with at least 200 paint attempts in each of the last 2 seasons. All that to say, or to ask a question that I'm sure is music to Michael Holley's ears. Did I get too excited about the potential of this pairing? And did I get too carried away with what they did out of the gate? And how concerning is it what they didn't do against Brooklyn, struggled against Orlando, and now coughing up the lead and losing to Denver and Philadelphia last night?
I mean, you know, obviously all those numbers encompass his time in Brooklyn, including the last month or so in Brooklyn when, let's just say, he wasn't.
He tanked it. He shut it down.
Yeah, wasn't at full energy level. So the question is how real is that? But I mean, if you go back to the beginning of the season, he was struggling, especially just shooting. Like, he's been able to get to the line, and that's why he's much higher in true shooting percentage, which measures efficiency and accounts for trips to the line, than he is in effective field goal percentage, which is just about shooting from the field. Yeah, man, and the performance against Brooklyn was just brutal. I mean, he almost didn't look like he wanted to be there once things started to go south. And, you know, even like just coming out of the half when they were down big, it's like, all right, let's see what they got in the first 5 minutes of the second half. And like the first 3 possessions of the second half were brutal, and that was that. And, you know, that you would hope for a little bit more urgency, a little bit more aggressiveness, a little bit more pop, you know, in his step. And so, yeah, I think you're concerned at this point if you're Philadelphia with the last few results. And then maybe, you know, maybe all of the Brooklyn sample size is more real than fake. You know, I think it's absolutely a concern. You definitely sort of drop the Sixers down a notch after these last 3 games. Because, yeah, and, you know, they got crushed against Brooklyn. They went to Orlando and barely escaped. And then obviously couldn't deal with Denver. And losing the Jokic off the floor minutes was just, you know, you can't do that against Denver.
Michael, withhold comment if you don't mind. So I'm just gonna move on. I know all that.
I got nothing. No, I enjoyed it.
Okay, good.
I enjoyed it.
Good.
I heard everything I needed to hear.
Great.
Moving on.
John, another joyful sight last night was seeing the Warriors. The band was back together last night. For Steph Curry's 34th birthday, he got Draymond Green back on the court, and he gave the Wizards 47 points. I mean, are we kind of sort of right back where we were at the beginning of the season? And you touched on this earlier. We talked about the top of the Western Conference, but are we right back where we were in terms of a whole and healthy Golden State Warriors team is the one to be feared? With all due respect to the Suns, and with all due respect usually means you're disrespecting them, but the Suns have earned the right to be the favorite. But nonetheless, the Warriors team that's about to get Iguodala back. We'll see what they can get from Wiseman once he gets back. But there's such a different group with Draymond Green. I just really want to drill down more on the Warriors with Klay rounding into form, Draymond returning to the lineup, Steph, you know, being able to explode and break out of this shooting slump. I just kind of wanted to see what your takeaway was and how you may write about this team in the upcoming power rankings, given that what we've seen from them absent Draymond Green wasn't the real Warriors to begin with.
Yeah, I think early in the season, you know, they played the Suns 3 times within about a month of each other, and they won 2 of the 3. You know, one of those wins, Devin Booker didn't play. But I think coming out of those 3 games, the last one was on Christmas, I thought, and I think most of us thought, well, you know, Phoenix might end up with the better record, but Golden State seems to be the team with the higher ceiling and maybe the matchup advantage. You know, I think in those 3 games, they tried to let DeAndre Ayton beat them, and Ayton wasn't necessarily up to the task completely. I took one thing down from last night. With Green and Curry on the floor, the Warriors scored 56 points on 33 offensive possessions, which is just ridiculous. Now, we can't, put too much into one game against the Wizards, but yeah, now the great thing is there's, 15 games left, and they have some time to sort of ramp up into the playoffs and sort of find that rhythm that they had early in the season. Like I said, I think when they were whole, they had the highest ceiling of any team in the league. The problem was that they weren't whole for 3 months, basically. And, things fell apart, sort of on both ends of the floor for them. So I can't wait. In 2 weeks from now, they have a 3-game stretch where they finish a trip in Memphis, and then they come home and they play Phoenix and Utah. So put those, 2 weeks from today is basically when that stretch starts. So, that's going to be the fun time to watch. Obviously, Phoenix is not going to have Chris Paul. But those are the 3 games to watch with this team. And I think, and that gives them, 2 weeks to sort of find a rhythm.
Hey, thanks for watching Brother from Another on YouTube. Make sure you hit subscribe before you leave, and be sure to watch us 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock. Appreciate you.